Wonderful.
Okay, Debbie, whenever you want to start.
Good morning. Welcome to Derry Presbyterian Church. My name's Debbie Hough, and I served this congregation as the Director of Christian Education for nearly 25 years, beginning in the fall of 1994. And this is the second in a 3-week series on Derry's heritage celebrations. Last week, Pam Whitenack was here to walk us through a lot of years as Derry celebrated anniversaries, and she stopped at the 275th anniversary celebration. And she'll be back next week to pick up and finish the 275th and start in preparation for the 300th anniversary, which is coming up soon. But I'm here to talk about one piece of the 275th anniversary, and that was a heritage tour. It was a privilege to be able to go on this tour. I remember going into Dick Houtz's office and saying, "Dick, I know you're going on this trip, but I'd like to go too. Is that possible?" So with Dick's help, we made that a possibility, and that trip has changed me in a number of ways, had a profound effect on me, and still does. So I am happy to be able to share with you a small part of that experience. And so it began. You can see the dates, June 16th through the 28th of 1999. We visited a number of places in what I'm still thinking of as the British Isles. We started in London, went to Belfast, toured Northern Ireland, and headed up to this part of Scotland, and before returning to London and heading back to the United States. With the exception of London, the rest of this all has an impact on Derry's heritage as well as Presbyterian heritage. This is the group that went, 28 members and friends. And whenever you see some quotations around words in this presentation, these are the words from Chuck Asphalt. And he made us all a little souvenir with a picture on one side, but writing on the other side, summarizing our trip. So you're hearing from Chuck Asphalt in places here. I'm sorry to say, looking at this group, a number of people are gone now. It was a great time to travel with this group. A couple of people in this group I still can't identify quite yet, so I'm hoping somebody someday can tell me who these two are and who she is. Everybody else, good friends from Derry here. Dick Houtz and Dave Birch were our fearless leaders. Some of you, okay, whoops. Sorry about that, technology. Dick Houtz was pastor here for a long time. Dave Birch was interim pastor here. So they were our fearless leaders that took us on this trip. We departed June 16th from Newark Airport and headed on to London. Now, what was especially meaningful for me in a number of ways was this was my first international trip. I had never flown that far, and the only other country I had ever been to was Canada. And somehow that doesn't seem to count when you're thinking of traveling internationally. So it was exciting for me to take this trip. And also, we're looking at Derry's heritage here, but it was partly mine as well, because my home church, growing up in the southwest corner of Pennsylvania, my home church was Tyrone Presbyterian Church. So I knew this was going to be my home church's heritage in many ways too. First stop was London. My first time to London. We got there, got to our hotel. The hotel wasn't ready for us yet, so everybody just kind of sat down. And me, naively, I had things I wanted to see, places I wanted to go, things I wanted to do. So I thought, I'm not just going to sit in a hotel lobby. So I went over to the concierge and said, I would like to go visit the Bethnal Green Museum of Childhood. How would I get there? So they gave me some instructions, and off I went into London by myself. I got on the tube, found Bethnal Green Museum of Childhood. It was fabulous. Decided to walk a little bit. Now, mind you, not a soul knows where I am in London at this stage. I'm not even sure where I am in London, but I got to see that, and then this was also on my list. The British Museum. I wanted to see the Rosetta Stone, and I knew it was there. I knew I didn't have much time, so I ran in the British Museum, and there is the Rosetta Stone, virtually unprotected. There's a little barrier in front of it. Now, that's not true these days. It's very well protected. But I was astounded that you could probably touch the Rosetta Stone back in 1999. Amazing to me. Another thing that I did in London, I discovered the National Gallery of Art in London, and there was a Rembrandt exhibit. It was all self-portraits of Rembrandt. This had nothing to do with anything in our heritage tour, but I thought, I may never get here again. I'm not just going to sit and wait around. So no one seemed to be concerned about where I was and what I was doing, but would I do that today? Travel around London after I'd only been there an hour? Probably not. But I did get to see some things that I would not have been able to see. And from London, we flew to Belfast. Now, this is, I don't know if you can read this from where you are, but Belfast, Northern Ireland, is sort of where so much happened involving the conflicts that happened in Northern Ireland. But as many things are the case, that didn't just happen. That was centuries in the making of what was going on over there. And this, I found this little history was in Presbyterians Today. But I call your attention to a couple things. You'll notice, well, maybe you will. I've got to watch what I push on this little thing. On this mural, it says the numbers 1916, which refer to this part where there's so much issue between the Protestants and the Catholics, which was virtually Ireland and England. A lot of conflict there. So that date had a lot of influence on what's going to start happening. And here in 1966, a lot begins to happen. Now, nothing in here says when Sinn Féin or IRA or all of those groups start happening, but a lot of that's going on at the same time. And then 1969 was a pivotal year. And if you can't see this, it says the British government orders troops onto the streets of Belfast and Londonderry to restore order. Relations between soldiers and Catholic civilians gradually deteriorate and the troubles escalate. They speak of this period of time as the Troubles. So 1969 is a pivotal year. 1994, paramilitaries. These are groups that are armed and ready to go on both sides, Protestant and Catholic, declare a ceasefire, allowing inter-party peace talks to begin. And 1998 was the year of the Good Friday Peace Agreement. When do we go? 1999. So this is fresh. This is new for them, this peace agreement. Naive Debbie does not picture any kind of history. And as I'm really working on this, putting it all together, for the first time it dawns on me we may be some of the first tourists to show up in Northern Ireland in a long, long time. And I called Dick Houtz and I said, Dick, what made you and Dave Birch think this was going to be safe? This is pretty new that's happening. And he said, well, you know, I don't think we even thought about that. I know I certainly didn't consider it, that this is a pretty new experience. And we'll talk about some of the things that happened pretty close to when we were there. We were picked up at the airport by a bright yellow and blue bus from a place called Corrymeela. Corrymeela is an ecumenical conference center, and you can't miss this bus as it's driving around. So the first thing they did was give us a little driving tour of parts of Belfast. As we're driving around, of course it rains. It rains a lot over there, but you begin to see some things that would give you pause. The picture on the left, you'll notice the flag that's flying in Belfast. That's Irish. That shouldn't be flying in Northern Ireland, which would make you know that this is probably a Catholic stronghold that's supporting Ireland. And what they want to do is stop under British rule and just unify into a whole Republic of Ireland. The mural that's on a building, there's murals all over the place, but this mural that's on the little inset to the right, now you might look at that and think, oh, somebody's promoting peace, no more guns. You might think that. Actually, what that says is no police. That's anti-police, which would be, the police would be working under government, which eventually leads back to Britain. This is another section in Belfast. Now, if you can see the flags that are flying, this one would tell you Protestant, because they're flying the Union Jack. And also, you'll notice they've painted the curbs red, white, and blue. Street curbs are painted red, white, and blue. So that would tell you, if you go over this curb, you're in Protestant territory. Now, as I was thinking about this is in 1999, I wondered, what would it be like today? And during the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, I got a smart TV. Mine died. I went and got a cheap TV, ended up being a smart TV. So I could watch television that I'd never seen before. And one of the shows I wanted to see was because it was filmed in Belfast, and I wanted to see would I recognize anything. It's called The Fall. And don't watch it if you're faint of heart. It's a tough murder mystery in essence, but it's filmed in Belfast, so I wanted to see what Belfast looked like. And one of the main characters goes to visit a client, and he's spotted right away getting out of his car by a group of people who are watching. They know he doesn't belong there, and they give him pretty stern warning when he's leaving. Don't come back. So it made me wonder, are we still, there's areas that are still separated. You either belong or you don't belong in those places. But here it was clear. You cross over this, you're in Protestant territory. And here's just a couple of the murals that were on these buildings. This part of Belfast looked a lot like Hall Manor in Harrisburg, just long rows of brick buildings where lots and lots of people would live. But on the edges of the ends of these buildings are painted these murals. It's a little disconcerting to see these murals. I mean, these these paramilitia people, their faces are covered, so you don't know who they are. But these are all over the place in 1999. This was the one time I got a little nervous on our drive. The bus driver was, I think, going to turn down this road, and he goes, uh-oh, something's going on down there. We're going to make a detour. And off we went. And what the police would do is just put these long gates, would cross over a street. So traffic is blocked from entering or leaving in places. And we just happened to see something like that. Gave me a little pause, I have to say. If I'd known then what I know now, I might have been like, whoa, maybe, what are we doing here? But I'm ever glad that we went, very much so. And I would say there's a movie coming out this fall. It's touring around different places at film festivals by Kenneth Branagh, who's acclaimed British actor. He's actually was born in Belfast, and the movie's title is Belfast. And it's about his life in 1969, which you'll remember that date, when the troubles began to escalate. And it's his take on what it was like from a child's perspective to live in a world that overnight changed, and what happened to him and his family. So I'm anxious to see that, just to get an even better historical perspective on what was going on then. Well, as we're done with our tour, they take us to a place called Bally Castle. Now, those that are in the room here, I've provided a map of Northern Ireland. You can see where Belfast is, Belfast being the capital. Now, Bally Castle, if you head way up onto the coast, up by the North Channel, you'll see Bally Castle. Little town, but in this little town is a place called Corrymeela. And Corrymeela is one of several communities that have been created by Protestants and Catholics as reconciliation centers, trying desperately to help create some kind of peace with these people who are living under such tension. And what Corrymeela would do is bring in two groups of teenagers, Protestant Catholic, two groups of women, Protestant Catholic, and bring them to live there for a few days. So they could see each other, meet each other, talk to each other under safe circumstances, and begin to see that we are more common than we are different. And hoping that when they would go back, that things might begin to get better. One of the leaders at Corrymeela said to us, there's one group we can't get to come here. It's the men. We cannot get the men to come. So they knew that was critical, but could not do it. But Corrymeela's on the coast, up there on that North Channel. One of the buildings that we had a kind of a meeting place, there were places where we would be lodged, but big room where you could sit around and talk and eat together. They would have crafts for children, do different things depending on what group was up there. But it was a lovely place to be. Hospitality was just amazing. And every night they would drive us down the hill from Corrymeela down to the hill to Antrim Arms, which was a pub in Bally Castle. And every night we would head down there, and they have different rooms that had bars, of course, but every room was full of musicians of all ages. It almost seemed like everyone in Bally Castle must play an instrument and must come to this place every night. And you could go from room to room and just hear this fabulous Celtic music. And once in a while, somebody would get up and dance in the middle of the floor. And it was just a fabulous place. And I longed to be able to play something. And I couldn't imagine what it would be that I could play. And then it occurred to me, maybe I could play the bones, which are pieces of bone that you click together, like if you've ever played spoons. Well, I found bones for sale in Montreat, North Carolina, and I tried and tried and tried, and I couldn't get one click to come out of those things. So if you see him, ask Mark Werner if he's learned to play them yet, because I gave them to Mark Werner. I figured if anybody could, he could. But in every room that you would go in, at least for me anyway, the music never stopped. It just went on, but the songs changed. And I would try so hard. I never could figure out who started and who stopped. Who's in charge here? Who changes the tune? I never could figure that out. But little people, older people, so intergenerational. What a fabulous legacy of learning to play this wonderful music. Now, the gentleman who's down in the lower right corner was on the staff at Corrymeela. His name is Alistair Kilgore. And Alistair took us everywhere and gave us this tour. He was with us the whole time. Very funny, great guy. And later, when we were back here, Alistair and his wife and Trevor Williams, who was the head of Corrymeela, came to Hershey and visited us here in Derry. I don't know if any of you might have been there. And Alistair and his wife brought me a gift when they came back, and it's over here on a table for those who are here in the room. I hope you'll take a look over there. It was a tea towel that's printed in Celtic design. So it's that one thing that I treasure a lot. While we were in Corrymeela, they drove us to Londonderry, and you can see that on your map. Now, Londonderry's going to be over on this side. We've gone from Bally Castle over here to Londonderry. And we went there to worship in the oldest Presbyterian church that's in that area, which we believe people came years ago, late 1600s, early 1700s, and came to this part of the world and founded Derry Presbyterian Church here. The Derry Presbyterian, first Derry Presbyterian people asked if we could send them a list of founding members, if we had such a thing. And somewhere along the line, there was a list created of about 12 names. I could not find it. I don't know if it's in the Heritage Room somewhere. Maybe you can find that. But they sent them a list of about 12, I think 12 to 15 names, surnames. And when we arrived on the Corrymeela bus, as we walked to different areas in the church on our way to the sanctuary, which took us a good hour to get to eventually, there were people standing along the way to greet us. My name's Murphy. My name's McClure. My name's... And people from all those surnames that founded this dairy were in that dairy. So it was an amazing experience to bridge those centuries. They had an amazing repast set up for us with tea and everything else you can think of in their fellowship hall. And we had a lovely time. For those who remember, that's Charlie Donahue getting some food. I think he did that several times. And the sign there telling us that it's the first Derry Presbyterian Church. The minister at the time was David Latimer. So this is 1999. We found out later then, well, this church was created. Queen Mary, who was Catholic, gave some money to help start a Presbyterian church because the Presbyterians helped in the siege of Derry. way back when, 1689. So there's been a community there. And they built a meeting house, sort of like this Derry's history. Meeting house, torn down, bigger building, till eventually this one was erected. Now, this church was infested with dry rot. We found that out after we came back, and they had to close it. So this church was closed until 2011, but it's back in operation again. So it's an interesting history of reconstruction and remodeling, and just like we know here, that it happens over there too. This is a picture of the interior that we saw. I have one picture. You can go online and take a little tour of Derry Church now, since it's been refurbished. But while we were still in the fellowship hall, in walked John Hume. We knew he was going to be there. He was here in Hershey at meeting. This had to have been late 1998, early 1999. He was here in Hershey meeting with members of Congress. I don't know if the whole Congress was here at the lodge. They had some kind of a retreat, and John Hume was one of the speakers. And John Hume knew a gentleman in Hershey who was a neighbor of Dave Birch named Tom Foley. And Tom Foley had been in government here in Pennsylvania. And Tom Foley had been over to Corrymeela. Dick Hough recalls that's how we found out about Corrymeela, through Tom Foley, who also linked us then with John Hume. Because when John Hume came, Tom Foley took him around. He noticed on the police cars it said Derry Township. That intrigued him. Why was it Derry Township? So he insisted that he be driven here to the church. He wanted to see this Derry Presbyterian Church. So he was here. We had a Presbytery event here that day. I came upstairs. They'd had a lunch break, came upstairs, and somebody met me at the door and said, "You have a Nobel Peace Prize winner in the yard." I went, "What are you talking about?" And it was before we had stained glass windows in the sanctuary. And everybody who was here was hanging out the windows or out in the yard to see John Hume. And Dick met him, and they exchanged information. Dick told him we're thinking about coming. He wanted to be kept in the loop. He said if we came, he would meet us. And he did. And he did. But what's astounding to me is, remember, it was Good Friday, 1998, when that peace accord happened. He's just done that not long after he's here. And not long before we go. I mean, to me, I'm astounded how close in time that was. David Trimble was the Protestant who was a part of that. So the fact that John Hume, Catholic, is meeting us at Derry Presbyterian Church is pretty amazing. But not just him, the mayor and his wife come as well. This is the mayor and his wife, again, Catholic. So they have come to welcome us at First Derry Presbyterian Church. And there we are outside of the church. I kind of stand in awe now thinking of what happened while we were there. And David Latimer, you can see on the other end, was the pastor at the time. It was pretty amazing that we got to meet these people. Now the mayor, after following worship, the mayor invited us down to where he did his work. So Londonderry was a walled city at one time. So, of course, it's expanded way beyond the walls. But the walls are right outside of the church. So you go up the stairs onto the wall, and we walked the wall down to where the city council met. Very beautiful building. We were invited in. We sat around where the council people would have sat. The mayor took his seat, and he presented us with these special plaques. The one that Dick Houtz got is over here on the table. it's part of the Heritage Room now. But, I mean, talk about a privilege. It was pretty amazing. And after this, the mayor invited us into his private chambers, which was a pretty big space, where we had more food. And he walked over to a wall, a paneled wall, and did something, opened it up, humongous alcohol supply in his private chambers. So he made offers to anybody who wanted something, which was just like, wow, that's a pretty impressive supply right there. But it was a phenomenal experience of hospitality and being welcomed. And you can see John Hume still with us there. Outside of this place now, there was a small park. And this, at the time, known as Ulster. And what happened here is this is the launching place for a lot of folks who left Northern Ireland and came to the United States. So this is a very poignant statue of a family who's being divided. He's facing the United States, she's facing Northern Ireland, and they will soon be separated, perhaps never to be together again. But thousands and thousands of families underwent this experience. And from here, they took us to a town called Omagh. And I think this was another day, but Omagh, you can see on your map, on my map here. This looks like it's a far distance, but it really isn't. Omagh's down this way. And in Omagh, you can see it on one side of your map. Omagh is in County Tyrone. Again, this speaks back to my heritage growing up from Tyrone Presbyterian Church. So these Northern Irish people got as far west as Dawson, Pennsylvania, and created a Tyrone. Very scenic, very beautiful little town. And what I have here is a picture of shortly after a bombing. Now this bombing happened after the peace accord. So we're in the summer, August of 1998, when this bomb went off in the city of Omagh. We're there in less than a year after this bombing takes place. This was a tough bombing. There was a celebration going on that day. The police, it's on record, the police started getting warnings. Car bomb near the courtyard. They had like 3 or 4 warnings. Car bomb near the courthouse. It was the courthouse. So finally, when the police took action, they started moving people away from the courthouse, down the street, and that's where the bomb was. So they, in essence, moved people to the bomb instead of away from it. There were 29 people killed instantly, and hundreds were damaged, and they were helicoptered different places. The city kicked into high gear for this, but I can't imagine the tension. You know, here they are celebrating kind of a euphoric peace accord, and within months, the troubles pop up again. They know that the car came from Ireland. They know it had stolen license plates for Northern Ireland. They have pictures of the car, but no one's ever been convicted of this. But here we are in less than a year that we're there, and I have to admit, I have no clue what these folks have been dealing with. It's not in my radar to have thought what just happened there. And here we are, and Corey Mila set up a time for us to talk about this. This is what we saw. The place where the bombs had destroyed shops are all covered up and cleaned up. Other buildings are propped up so they don't fall down. they had us meet with two priests, one Episcopal and one Catholic. And we had the opportunity to talk with them and to hear them talk about what the bombing had done to them and for them. And one of the things they said which struck me very powerfully was, we don't know what their intention was, but what it did was bring us together. It has brought us together because these bombs are indiscriminate. They kill Protestants, they kill Catholics. And they did that day. And it has brought us together to talk in ways which we hadn't. And this gentleman in the kind of teal jacket was Trevor Williams, and he was the head of the Corrymeela community. So it was a privilege to have heard from these folks, still pretty raw from the loss of life and business and what it had done to their towns and their churches and their families and their friends. So peacemaking there was alive and well, but the peace accord was on paper still. Still hadn't happened, but I don't believe, I keep watching now, they've had, every once in a while there's some incident in Northern Ireland, but nothing like this. Well, then they took us in the bus to do a little sightseeing. And one of the things, they were so thrilled that we were there because people didn't come to Northern Ireland. It's a feeling similar to that what I get when I go to Pakistan. People don't visit Pakistan. They don't see many Americans coming to Pakistan. It just doesn't happen. And here in Northern Ireland, for all those years, people didn't travel there. They weren't traveling, and here we were. And the Corrymeela bus was a signal to people. People knew and respected that bus and what they were doing there. So I suspect they were very glad to be able to bring us to different places in Northern Ireland. You see there, well, like you see in lots of other places in the British Isles, lots of ruins. That's called Dunluce Castle on the left. And on the right is some of the coastline that we were passing along in order to get to the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, which is some kind of a volcanic thing that these kind of obelisks just erupted out of the ground, and they're in very interesting shapes, and there's just thousands of them just shot up out of the ground. So that's the Giant's Causeway. They wanted us to see that. It's one of the whatever number natural wonders of the world. It is pretty amazing. And they also took us in Omagh to the Ulster American Folk Park. What it did was document for folks who lived in Northern Ireland, perhaps that would be a pretty fancy house to lived in Northern Ireland, thatched roofs, what happened in your life and what life was like there. And you walk through a town and you see people doing things, farming, blacksmithing, doing things. You walk into a boat, and now this boat, you see what life was like on this ship. And when you walk out, you're in the United States. You're in New York, in the United States. And now what's going to happen to your life once you cross the ocean out on the other side? So this was the Ulster American Folk Park. One of the houses that they showed, they have moved to this site, is Thomas Mellon's house. And Mellon is a big Pittsburgh name. I don't know if other places. Mellon Bank is a big name. So Thomas Mellon came from Northern Ireland. Now we've taken a ferry across to Scotland, and we were taken to Glasgow. And in Glasgow, we traveled around seeing a lot of the architecture of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, sort of contemporary arts and crafts kind of architect. We saw a lot of his work. And then they were taking us for a meal, but the restaurant wasn't ready for us yet. So here we are waiting in a parking lot. I was like, what is this next to the parking lot, this museum? What is that? Oh, it's an art museum. Okay, we can stay in a parking lot, or we could go to an art museum. Duh. So I went to the art museum. Oh my gosh, I can't believe what we saw. This Salvador Dali painting, which is 2 stories tall. It's unbelievable. And again, another religious experience for me. It was totally unexpected. And I thought, oh my gosh, here's a church group. We're standing in a parking lot. And you know this is in there? Why didn't we see that? But I'm so glad we just took the initiative and went in. It's an amazing painting. And you can walk up to the top of it and look down at it. So it's, in essence, God's view of the crucifixion. It's very powerful. Salvador Dali, very powerful. And then from Glasgow, we went to Edinburgh and back to Presbyterian heritage here. In essence, the birthplace of Presbyterianism with John Knox. And we're going to talk some more about that in a couple of weeks when we look at the Reformation. But Knox was a student of John Calvin's. Calvin, 2nd generation reformer. Luther would have been 1st generation. Calvin was 2nd generation. Calvin spends most of his time in Switzerland. Knox goes there to study with him, and Knox creates the Presbyterian Church. So it's kind of a family tree from Calvin to Knox. This is John Knox's home. This can't really, that's a little sign says John Knox home where he lived in Edinburgh. John Knox fought with Mary, Queen of Scots, who we've heard gave some money to help build a Presbyterian church in Londonderry. But here they are fighting. She wants Scotland to be Catholic, and they probably are off and on, Catholic, Protestant, with state churches. And Knox wins, and Scotland has a state church, which is Presbyterian. We also went to St. Giles Cathedral, and we had the opportunity to worship there. I have no memory of that. I have no idea what worship was like. But we celebrated communion. That I do remember. At a certain point in time, we were invited up in groups to surround a humongous square communion table. And we went around the 4 sides of this table. And they had a common cup, which as it got started, you could see people going like, oh, I don't know, can I do that? Can I do that? Now, I don't know what they are doing today, but back then, common cup. But it wasn't just a cup. This was like a punch bowl. It was huge. And you got this cup, and when you went to get a drink out of it, your whole face went in the cup. It was the most, to be one in communion in a way that I had never experienced before. So different than little cups, or just to put your whole face into this cup to get a drink, and the aroma, and just that I will never forget, that communion experience. But this is where John Knox preached. And my understanding is he was a pretty fiery orator, a pretty fiery individual. We have some John Knox here at Derry. This is the banner for the Scots Confession. I'm pointing to my right here. These banners, if you know anything about it, or maybe now when you look at it, you'll know. The blue background on the shield is the color of the Church of Scotland. The tartan and in an X-shaped cross. That cross, this form, is called the St. Andrew's cross. And St. Andrew was the apostle who brought the gospel to Scotland. That's legend maybe, or fact, I'm not sure. The tartan, or that plaid, is that of the Hamilton clan in honor of the first martyr of the Scottish Reformation, Patrick Hamilton. The Celtic cross in the middle is another ancient form associated with Christians in the British Isles. The ship is a symbol for the church, and the Scots Confession contains a strong statement about the church. The Bible and the sword stands for Paul calling the Word of God the sword of the Spirit, and the sharpness of John Knox's preaching of the Word was a major power for Reformation in Scotland. He was definitely a force to be reckoned with. The burning bush that is not consumed reminds us of Moses' Sinai experience, thus a symbol of God's presence and call. It's the chief symbol of the Church of Scotland. And the other picture here is of we have a Reformation kind of a hallway of windows going up the ramp. And this is the John Knox window. And you'll see the St. Andrew's crosses with the blue backgrounds. Mark Brown, who was a member at the time, was from Scotland. And Mark was helpful in getting us to get the symbolism correct in this window. It was given to Derry by Henry Nixon. And you see in the middle there is the burning bush in front of the St. Andrew's cross, and there are two thistles on either side, the flower of Scotland. Now you may wonder why there's a goat, what that has to do with John Knox. It doesn't have anything to do with John Knox, but it does have everything to do with Henry Nixon. Henry was a huge supporter of the Heifer Project, and Henry, he didn't know why, but Henry always gave goats. He would donate the funds for goats. He was big into agriculture with the state at one time, but Henry loved goats. So you can tell a story about Henry Nixon just by looking at that window. Then we went to St. Andrews. And you can see on the map St. Andrews. Oops. All right. Oh, wait, that's Northern Ireland. Oh, you can't see it on this one. It was on the first map. St. Andrews isn't far. But again, more ruins. This is the St. Andrews Cathedral. And you can get a feel here. This is huge. And you can see the cruciform shape of this cathedral, built on the shape of a cross. It's huge. And here you have from one end to the other end. Very, very big. And a cemetery all around it. Now, a couple things that struck me in this cemetery. Again, Celtic crosses. You see them all over the place. But this one was very striking because it has the Celtic knots carved into it. And then this one. Again, it was another thing dawned on me. You probably can't read that. This is a fairly new grave. John Auld MacDonald, who died in 1997. But there were all kinds of old MacDonalds buried in this grave. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, old MacDonald had a farm. And I'm thinking, MacDonald was a farmer who's old. No, Old MacDonald, that's his name. Old MacDonald had a farm. It's not that he's old, it's just that's part of his name. And our American English has turned it into something that I misunderstood. But there are lots and lots and lots of old MacDonalds in Scotland. And for those who are truly religious, there's a picture of the old course. And by gum, in my head, that's Tiger Woods on a Sunday who's just waiting with his red on. Probably not. But Charlie ends with, or Chuck Asfalk ends with, after an overnight stay in London, we returned home on June 28th. This heritage tour was one of Derry's 275th anniversary events. And I have to have a comment. Everybody came home except Florence. if you remember, Florence Niemeyer, who went on this trip, hiked, she did everything we did. Hiked up to Edinburgh Castle, hiked all over the place. Our last night in London, she trips getting out of the elevator in the hotel and breaks her hip. And the next day we flew home and left Florence in a hospital in London. I'll never forget that experience of feeling so bad that we had to leave her there. She certainly could not have traveled with us. But her brother went over, stayed with her until she had surgery, but until she was good enough to fly back. And then came back to Derry and was with us for a long time after that. But it was quite a shaking way to end an amazing trip. But in Florence's mind, she did everything she wanted to do. And so if it was going to happen the last night and not the first night or during the midst, excuse me, of her trip. It was an amazing trip for me to experience places that I would never have experienced. I looked up Corrymeela again. They are alive and well and growing and functioning and still continuing the great work of reconciliation that they have been doing for a long time. They're a hostel. People can go and stay. So if you ever think you might want to take a trip, call those folks and see if you can stay with them. It's an amazing ministry that they are doing. And we lost John Hume last year. He passed away. But his life's work of creating peace in the place that he loved and called home, I think may be finally happening. And, you know, part of me wishes we had a John Hume here in the United States to help us dig down, peel the layers of the onion off and build relationships and create peace. It takes a lifetime to do that kind of work. But my thanks to Derry Church for giving me the time and allowing me to have gone on this trip. It definitely changed my life and the way I think of myself as a Presbyterian. And it's a rich heritage that we have. So thank you. That's all for me. Questions that you might have that I can try and answer? If not, for those who are here, I encourage you to go over and take a look at some of the things that I have. I will say, you may look over there and see something that you, on first glance, looks like a potato. It's a rock. I actually brought 3 rocks back from Northern Ireland in my suitcase, and that's the smallest one. I remember the guys used to lug our suitcases around for us, getting them and bringing them down so we could haul them. And I remember one of them picked up my suitcase and just went, "What do you got in there, rocks?" And I went, maybe, maybe. Yes, it was a rock. Actually, like I said, I brought 3 rocks. Don't ask me why. It just seemed like an important thing. I brought a piece of Northern Ireland back with me, and it's in my garden today. So again, many thanks to all of you. Now I can answer any questions.